Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. Like she said, I'm Katelynn, and yes, I do have duck pics. I am that kind of duck mom. So let me start by telling you a little bit about my journey into software engineering and how I got here to learning about Elixir. I'm originally from a very small town in Oregon of about 800 people. And so there wasn't a lot of opportunity to learn about software engineering. I did manage to take one computer class, and I built a site that was fully HTML and CSS, and it was just a picture of a turtle, and you'd click on it, and it would take you to another picture of a turtle. And as far as I was concerned, I was the master of the internet. But like I said, there weren't really any opportunities to learn more than that, so after finishing high school, I majored in psychology. I became a teacher for small children for a while, and then I moved to New York City where I became a nanny and started to make friends with software engineers because I played D&D, and that's where I met all my friends. Definitely not a nerd. So they encouraged me to branch out and take a boot camp, the Grace Hopper program. So it was a JavaScript full stack boot camp, and after finishing that, I joined Launch Scout, where I became an Elixir engineer. And as software engineers, you may have noticed a bit of a pattern with the beginning of my journey, and that is there wasn't much going on with the back end. The first application that I ever built, I didn't even know the back end was a thing. And my journey with the boot camp was JavaScript, which is a very well-known language for being very good in the front end. When it came to my front end, I was in love. It was my playground. I had 3D objects, I had parallax, it was a joy. When it came to my back end, it technically existed. This is the entire back end for my personal website. I'm not even joking, this is it. There is one Git, oh, thank you, clicker, fancy. There's one Git, there isn't even a put. If I needed to put more information in the back end, I would just reseed the data so that I wouldn't have to touch the back end. So how did I get from a point where while I was applying for jobs, I would only apply for jobs that said they were for the front end or were full stack but were very obviously focused in the front end, to spending almost all of my time in the back end and gushing about it and absolutely loving it? Well, the first thing that happened was the application process. The application process for Launch Scout was a little different than most application processes. If anyone has ever done the process of hiring folks, you might find it a bit monotonous. It's the same resumes over and over again. You are looking at the same algorithm problems, trying to find someone that fits from pretty much the same stack. I can confirm as someone who just got out of the job search not too long ago, it's the same on our end. We are filling out the exact same applications over and over again, solving the same algorithms, trying to prove that we're an interesting candidate. When I did the application for Launch Scout, though, they had a basic algebra test, which was exciting to me. I love math. So it was interesting enough to hook me, even though I might be touching the dreaded back end, and it was a language I'd never even heard of, let alone coded in. I had no idea what Elixir was. I ended up applying anyway. And I absolutely loved the process. When we were doing the live coding, I was allowed to ask questions. There was documentation. The documentation was great, and it felt like what true pair programming was versus a test. So when I was given the opportunity to work with Launch Scout, I took it. Excuse me for just a minute. And so started my journey into learning Elixir. I started out learning Elixir by trying to solve the same algorithms that I had solved as a JavaScript engineer, but in the mindset of an Elixir developer, which is kind of easier said than done. I was talking to one of my coworkers, and I said that learning a language after you already know a language in coding is like learning a romance language when you already know a romance language. You may assume, because they have the basic foundations, that you already know what's going on and come into it saying, I've already solved this problem. I know how to solve it. And they commented that from going to JavaScript to Elixir was more like going to Japanese once you understood Spanish. And they weren't wrong, because as much as I knew how to solve these problems as a JavaScript developer, I very much did not know how to do them as an Elixir developer. My best friends, the for loops, were completely out the window. Explicit returns, they weren't there. How is the computer supposed to know what to return if I don't tell it? And the conditions that I was now using, instead of setting the variables inside of the conditions because of immutability, you would set the entire condition to be a variable. It was mind-blowing. I had no idea where to start. Thankfully, as an apprentice, I had people that were guiding me on my journey. One of the books that I read during the apprenticeship was something called Apprenticeship Patterns. And one of the basic ideas in the first chapter is that if you come to learning with a full cup, you have no room to learn. And that's a very hard thing to do as someone who just came out of the job search, especially when you are new to software engineering. People expect you to have an expertise as a beginner. They expect you to know your language well, to have a very good understanding of algorithms. And it was really hard to let go of that as an apprentice and say that I am, in fact, a beginner and that I need that help. But Elixir was an easy language to trust fall with, because as many of you, I'm sure, are Elixir developers here, Elixir developers love nothing more than to gush about how much they love Elixir. Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm here, to gush about Elixir. Even people who did not code in Elixir were excited that I was learning Elixir. As I said, I had many friends that had many different languages in software engineering, and I would always ask them why they loved the language that they coded in, why they would code in it. And some people would have answers. Some of them honestly did it because that's what their job made them do, which, fair. But no one was ever genuinely as excited about not only software engineering, but just the language they were coding in as Elixir developers. And so it made it very easy to confidently come in as someone who is new and know that there was going to be that support there. And it shows. With the documentation that's thorough, with the Elixir forums that are full of people that are excited to help and to be a part of the community. And that's what it was. It was a community more than it was a language. And so I started to learn Elixir. And as an Elixir developer, let me gush a little bit more about Elixir. I'm going to tell you my first honest opinion when I made my first Phoenix app, and it may surprise you. Elixir pissed me off because it made so much sense. I went to make a boilerplate, and it was mix Phoenix new. And then there were a few commands, and then you had a boilerplate, along with testing, a database. When I went to make a boilerplate with JavaScript, it was a 5-step thing with 7 micro steps per step, and then it wouldn't work. Because someone had updated a package, and nobody knows which package it is. And it made no sense because we as developers aren't here to rebuild the wheel. We're here to make exciting things. If someone just wanted a boilerplate and a background, they'd use one of those template websites and just, we're here to make things exciting. So of course, boilerplate should be simple. Of course, you don't need to explicitly tell the code what to return. It's always the last thing in a function, just return it. I don't know how many times in JavaScript that I had a function fail because I forgot to just put that one word return and couldn't figure out what was going on. And not to mention, with the multiple function heads and piping and pattern matching, it was super easy to follow the flow of the data instead of one giant nested function that you had to solve every time you were trying to use the code. So I've talked a little bit about how I love Elixir in general, but how did Elixir help me to love the back end specifically? When I became an apprentice, one of the first things that I did was write tests. This was another extreme weakness in my coding because during the boot camp, they were suggested but not required. Therefore, I never wrote a test the entire time. I now work at a company that does test-driven development. The fact that I work at a company that is test-driven development and I work in the back end is something I never believed would happen because both the things I hated. But it really helped me to learn the flow of the data in the back end because in order to write a good test, you need to understand what you want your code to accomplish. You need to understand what the result is in order to tell the code, this is what I'm expecting to happen. As well as the error messages are honestly an amazing teacher because it tells you exactly where the code is failing, so you know where the code is flowing. You fix that, it tells you where the code to's next, and you continue down the flow. And honestly, Elixir has some of the best error messages. I always say that I'm weird because I love solving bugs. I love error messages because they just make so much sense. And Elixir was great for that. So it was a great way for me to find my way into the back end and follow that flow. And one of the things that I realized while going through this flow is I had always assumed I didn't like the logic of the back end. I loved the front end because it was creative, there was problem solving, there was math. As far as I was concerned, the back end was there to make the front end run. And I soon came to realize once I started using Elixir and understanding the back end more, that the back end is so vital to code because data is one of the reasons that we make websites. Without that data, you have a glorified screensaver. And because of Elixir, it was easy to follow that flow. And one of the things that I realized is I so badly wanted to love the back end through my entire journey. It's just I didn't know how to do it. I was, in fact, loved back-end logic and never realized it. That website that I showed you before where I didn't have a back end, turns out I did. It was in the front end. This is me trying to paginate using JavaScript in the front end. This is not all of the code. I could not fit it in one spot because you're not meant to paginate in the front end, but I did it. Here is another example. I was sending emails from the front end. Instead of enqueuing them in the database and seeing if there was an error and if it didn't send, I just assumed it did send, and thankfully the emails were only going to me, so I'm the only one who lost out. But the point was, I really enjoyed writing this code. I loved the logic of the back end. It's just with using JavaScript, a language that was not meant to write back-end code, I was so intimidated I didn't know how to approach the back-end, so I would just shove it where I was comfortable, in the front end. But Elixir really helped me to follow that flow of where the code was going. And not only for the backend, but for the full stack, how the full stack truly comes together. I truly believe I did not become a true full stack developer until I started learning Elixir. I used to work with cars. I know I didn't mention that earlier, but if I told you every job I had, we'd be here all day, trust me. And one of the things that is the most common complaint about mechanics is cars are not built with mechanics in mind. Something as simple as changing oil can involve taking out pieces that have absolutely nothing to do with what you're trying to do, but they were built for the user. They were built to look interesting and be easy to manufacture, not to fix. Elixir is what it felt like to work on a car that was built for a mechanic. Because it was. It was built by the people who would be using the code. It was built by people who wanted to be able to use their code again and share it, to have other people look at their code as well. It was so intuitive. JavaScript, as a more front-end language, was more interested in the user, which makes sense. If you don't have a user, why are we making things? But because it was so focused on the user, it didn't really care as much about us, the engineers, it felt like. So I would come back to code that I had written months later, and I would have to parse through this giant function and try and figure out where the code was flowing. I wrote the code myself, and I wouldn't know what I had done. You could leave notes for yourself, but that can only get you so far. Meanwhile, with Elixir, with the multiple function heads and with the labeling of pattern matching, I could not only come back to my own code and understand what was going on, but come into someone else's code and quickly understand where that flow of data was, versus trying to traverse 40 different components trying to find where does that one variable start out as. I also believe that Elixir really does the balance of caring about the user as well. It's not only caring about us as developers, but with things like Phoenix Live View, having the open sockets so that the user can quickly find that data and have it, have the flow. The balance there is amazing, that you can have code that is easy to write as developers and read, but also not compromise for the user. And I found that very fascinating. And it also made it very easy to study other people's work, as I said. And as someone who was new to software engineering, it made it so that I could confidently write valuable code and make it easy for other developers to follow, and also know that, the user would be still getting that value. It's something that's not easy to do as a new developer, to know that you can not only write code that other developers will understand, but that you also aren't compromising what the user is doing. So it really gave me that confidence to come in and come into the back end and flourish. And looking back on my journey and this code, it makes sense to me why everyone loves Elixir so much and wants to gush about it, because it is great. It is a community, and everyone is excited to be here. And it truly helped me to love the back end, and I am looking forward to many, many more years of playing in the playground of the back end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katelynn. That was wonderful. Any questions? Any questions from people in the room?
I promise I won't megabyte.
I'll start off with a question then. So, you've made this journey from JavaScript, purely front end, to working with Elixir on the back end. Do you do any stuff today that allows you to sort of blend or balance the two? And what's that experience like?
Yeah, actually the project that I'm working on right now uses React as well as the back end. And it's an interesting process to come back to React, which was my favorite playground before I started with Elixir. And I still enjoy it and know how to use it, but I found myself with a problem on the front end, and I was like, oh, this will be super easy. I'm just gonna pattern match it. Oh, no, can't do that. Okay, well then I'll just make no. Okay, this is gonna be a really nested, yep. So that's kind of how it works is I have adjusted to understanding where the data is and being able to follow things. And when you go back to having to follow all that mess, it really hurts. But I still enjoy it. It's, yep.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. All right, I knew it. Okay. We've got a question from the #1 questioner.
Hello. First of all, thank you for your talk. It was really nice seeing this because, at home, my girlfriend is a front-end developer, and I've been trying to bring her to Elixir and for the back-end world. Yeah, and she also loves React and things like this, and it's really nice to see that this is possible. Something that I wanted to know is did the front end help you with logic for your back end? Do you use your experience from the front end on your code on the back end?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, I would say, if nothing else, if you are worried about learning Elixir or the back end, if I can do it, you can. The evolution there was huge. But as far as the front end helping me with back end logic, I would say yes, if nothing else, because it was the step that I needed to understand the back end. I wasn't quite ready yet with JavaScript to fully be in the back end, but it helped me to traverse that logic and understand what it is you would be doing in the back end later. So it was a very approachable way to understanding that data. So I'm glad that I went in the route that I did.
Hey, thank you so much for your talk. It was great that you opened up. As a second career developer myself, I was just curious how you found your education background and your psychology background has influenced your work in development.
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly believe that it extremely affects what I do. One thing with psychology and teaching is it really brings me to focus more on the user. I think a lot of the time with developers, we're so focused on the results and what we're coding at the time that we forget that there is a person on the other side of that. And with the teaching and psychology background, I'm just as excited as what it will be like as a user, as a person using the results as I am making those results. And I also think it really helps with we do a lot of consulting. We're a consulting business, and so I talk to a lot of clients. And having a psychology background and a lot of background in customer service, it's very easy for me to explain things in a way that makes sense to a client, that isn't so technical that they don't care how the back end works. They don't care where the data is. They just want to know what's going to happen. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Can I get a show of hands how many people are career change engineers in this room? That's so awesome. I love that about the Elixir community and the Beam community. Any other questions? Any other questions from people in the room? Yes, perfect. Flora, here you go.
I have a question. I know that you said when you were a teenager you were really into programming, and then you went to college and you didn't study it, and then you decided to get back later through boot camp. So, like, kind of what changed? Like, you said it was your friends part a little bit, but like, I was just curious, like, what brought you in, if later, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I kind of kept that mindset of software engineering is just out of my reach when I went to college. I was like, it's too intimidating. Sure, I like math and science, but like that's big brain, never gonna get there kind of thing. But honestly, the reason that I was interested in psychology was the same reason that I was interested in software engineering, which I didn't realize at the time. It's I like to know why things do what they do. I was interested in the mechanisms of the brain. The brain is the coding of the human being. And so in a way, I was studying human software engineering and just not realizing it. And it took me a while to, when I moved to a big city that has a lot of opportunities and boot camps became more prevalent, and it just became more approachable. And also, as I said, I had friends that were software engineers, and they were excited about it. And they were also teachers, so they wanted to build little apps with me. We made dice rollers, and it became more clear that it is something that you can approach, and it's not this thing in space that you can't touch. So that's what led me to that.
I guess just because I know there are people who here are professors of computer science, so I didn't know if you had any ideas of, like, if you were in college, like, what's a class you think you might have taken or something, or advice? Because I had a similar experience of feeling like I don't belong here, I'm not going to take these classes, so just wondering.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because when I was in college, I did take courses in just about literally everything except computer science. From ballroom dancing to karate to art deco. So I feel like if there was a course that was on software engineering from a different perspective, for instance, if it was, one of the projects that I was interested in making was a 3D model for artists, that if you made a pose, you could see the model from all the different angles and therefore be able to make the drawing from different angles. And I think because software engineering is so vast, it's such an open thing, that if you can have a little bit more of those peaks of someone's interest or specifics, it makes it more approachable, is what I would say.
Thank you for that. Any questions before we wrap up? All right. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Very inspiring.